Marvel's What If series just recently came out, and after binging the whole thing in one sitting, I have to say that it's actually a pretty fun and wacky show. Even though I may have a few problems with some of the episodes, I will say that this overall concept of a what if show can be very interesting. This show has already proven that it wants to explore some very experimental concepts and is not afraid to push some of those concepts to their most heartbreaking conclusions. And, obviously, this show literally has an endless amount of possibilities for future episodes. You can have any Marvel scenario play out in this show, and that has given many fans, including myself, the opportunity to get a bit creative. So today, I want to throw a few scenarios that I would personally like to see in the future of this show. Now that season 1 is all wrapped up, I want to present my own wish list for future episodes of Marvel's What If. Hey guys, my name is DJ, and ever since its announcement, the What If series has been the driving force for so much creativity within the Marvel fandom. Like I said before, in a show where literally anything can happen, it's hard not to think about interesting and fun scenarios that could play out on screen. And so, with my own imagination running rampant following the first season, here are 5 of my own ideas that I would love to see in future episodes of this show. Number 5. What if Rocket Raccoon never met Groot? Ever since the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, Rocket and Groot have been inseparable. They have traveled throughout the universe together, picking up bounties and causing mayhem wherever they please. Even before meeting Star-Lord, Drax, and Gamora, Groot and Rocket were teaming up to take on whatever challenges lay ahead of them. However, I think it would be pretty interesting to see what their respective journeys would have been if they just simply never met each other at all. For starters, we've never really seen them outside of their time with the other Guardians. So, seeing what Groot and Rocket are like without their fellow teammates could be interesting. We could sort of see what Rocket and Groot were like as individuals before meeting any of the other Guardians. I could even see this as a rare moment of wordless storytelling for the MCU, with Groot going on this entire journey without even saying a word. Or on the flip side, we could see an interesting but sad ending with Rocket Raccoon as his downward spiral continues without having any sort of friends behind him. We've seen Rocket's self-destruction before in the MCU, so the idea of him showcasing this self-destruction and what could happen if he didn't have his friends behind him, well, that would be pretty interesting, if not just very sad. Hell, I could even see a happy ending for Rocket here, with Rocket somehow finding his way to Yondu, and the two of them finally being the long-lost brothers that we partially saw in Guardians 2. And as for Groot's overall story, well, I'm not entirely sure what he would be able to do on his own. Like I mentioned, Groot is a character that can't really speak, so he doesn't have many characteristics outside of the cute tree man. The most interesting scenario I could think of with Groot comes in the form of just his whole species and the idea of watching him go through this society alongside other Groots. That way there's at least some people around that he can bounce off of, while we also get an interesting look into what a society of Groots would be like, how they would function with their unique abilities. But either way, I do believe that this separation for Rocket and Groot, even just for one episode, could be pretty interesting to watch. Number 4. What if Loki was worthy to wield MJLONIR? Yeah, okay, so I understand that having an entire entry about Loki specifically might seem a bit redundant. Loki is already one of the most explored characters in all of the MCU, with his show diving into multiple versions of the character. But one of the variants that I'm kinda shocked we didn't get to see throughout that show is a version of Loki that is actually able to wield MJLONIR. Especially since there are multiple times where he's actually done it in the comics. I'm not gonna go too in-depth with those versions of the character. I'll just turn your attention over to Loki number 1 and Thor number 4 if you want to do more research on the subject. Not to mention the fact that there is evidence that Loki in the MCU has been able to wield MJLONIR. Kinda. There is in fact a deleted scene from Thor: The Dark World that shows Loki carrying MJLONIR, so it's clear that they have had intentions of introducing this version of Loki in the MCU. And unless they have plans to introduce this variant of Loki in season 2 of his show, I'd say that a version of Loki where he wields Mjolnir could provide an interesting story for a second season of What If. I think this could provide a very deep and interesting story as opposed to, well, their first What If story involving Thor.
The Midgardian word for women like you. Party pooper!
With Loki being able to wield Mjolnir, I think there are actually a lot of interesting questions that a writer at Marvel could play around with. Would Loki still be a mischievous god wielding around this hammer, or would he be an evolved version of the character that fits Mjolnir's rules? Would Loki finally be able to rule Asgard like he's always wanted? Hell, how would Thor be able to deal with his brother being able to wield the almighty hammer? Would he be jealous, or would he be proud of his brother? There are so many different ways that the hammer would be able to affect Loki that it's actually a perfect scenario for the What If series. Number 3, what if S.H.I.E.L.D. never fell in Captain America Winter Soldier? So far in this video, these pitches have been dealing with more extraterrestrial characters and concepts. But as we've seen in the real What If show, with episodes like the Killmonger episode and the Murder Mystery episode, it seems as though this show likes to stick to more down-to-earth concepts as well. So I figured that I would throw in a more grounded scenario that could have, in theory, completely changed the MCU. While it may sometimes feel like a more unimportant event in the grand scheme of the MCU, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s collapse feels like one of those events that actually could have changed a lot about the series. Without the existence of S.H.I.E.L.D., superheroes sort of lost any sense of government protection, and thus the government sort of had no choice but to intervene with the Sokovia Accords being introduced, which, as we all know, led to the collapse of the Avengers in Civil War. But if S.H.I.E.L.D. was still around, then the supers would still have some sort of government protection. So with S.H.I.E.L.D. looking to protect the supers, the Sokovia Accords perhaps wouldn't have even existed in the first place. So already the timeline would have been massively different if the organization didn't collapse. Not only that, but this what if scenario could also explore how S.H.I.E.L.D. would have operated without the Hydra infiltration taking place. Perhaps the entire S.H.I.E.L.D. conglomerate would have proven to be much more successful without Hydra holding them back. And if anything, it would be fun just to see Nick Fury be useful again, considering he basically hasn't done anything since Winter Soldier. You could even let this episode be like one of those more, shall we say, unique type of episodes like we saw in the first season. Like how episode 3 of What If was a side murder mystery episode, you could have this what if scenario be more of a government analysis or even a James Bond-like episode for the show. It could be kind of a standout episode just like how episode 3 was in the first season. I think S.H.I.E.L.D.'s existence overall, if it never collapsed, could have provided a lot of very interesting tweaks to the MCU. And speaking of very large yet perhaps interesting tweaks to the MCU story, number 2, what if the other half of the Avengers survived during the snap? It's perhaps the biggest moment to take place in the MCU. Thanos gathered all 6 Infinity Stones and randomly killed half of the universe in a single snap. However, notice how I said randomly. In order for Thanos' plan to come to fruition in a completely fair manner, he decided that he needed to randomly kill half of the universe. So, while people like Tony Stark and Steve Rogers lucked out of death, guys like Peter Parker and Stephen Strange turned to ash because they just weren't lucky enough to survive. But how would the Avengers have fared against Thanos if everybody's luck was reversed? What if the heroes who survived the snap were the ones who died while their counterparts took the helm in the fight against Thanos? Well, then it would be an entirely different fight with entirely different consequences. And, just so you're aware, the people who would have survived the snap would have been Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Falcon, Groot, Drax, Star-Lord, Mantis, Wasp, Hank Pym, Janet Van Dyne, Maria Hill, Nick Fury, Scarlet Witch, Shuri, Spider-Man, and Bucky Barnes. Now I know that list of people doesn't feel nearly as overpowered as the original surviving list. Like, I understand that we're trading out guys like Thor and Hulk for people like Falcon and Bucky. But there are still some pretty interesting possibilities with this group of superheroes trying to band together to fight Thanos. You have Doctor Strange and his vast knowledge of the Infinity Stones that a storyteller at Marvel could play with. You have the incredible power of Scarlet Witch to stand toe-to-toe with the incredible power of Thanos. You have Black Panther leading the Wakandan army, you have Spider-Man and his superhuman abilities, and you even have Star-Lord's newfound rage after the death of Gamora. This concept seems so obvious for a series like this that I'm actually kind of surprised we didn't see a version of it in the first What If season. Sure, you could argue that it's not really that creative of a concept, but I still believe that it could pull out a very interesting battle. And number one, what if the Stan Lee Spectacular? Okay, so I know that the likelihood of this pitch coming to fruition is very low. But after his cameo in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, it's clear that Stan Lee is some sort of watcher in the MCU. So, if you kind of work with me here, we can kind of say that Stan the Man is canonically a part of the MCU. Which means he could technically be manipulated within the confines of the What If show. Right? Well, I think so at least. Which got me thinking about all of Stan Lee's past cameos in the MCU, and I started to wonder if there was any way to manipulate these scenes into telling a fun story. And after going back and re-watching all of his cameos in the past MCU movies, I came up with a few concepts that at the very least could be quite charming. For instance, remember that cameo of his in The Incredible Hulk where he drank some of Banner's blood before dying? Well, what if this instead turned Stan into another Hulk or Abomination-like creature? I just think Stan's lovable and hopeful personality combined with the bombastic powers of the Hulk could lead to a pretty interesting story. Actually, a story where he just refuses to use any of his Hulk powers due to his peace-loving personality? Well, that could end up being kind of funny, I think. But that's just one idea that I have. Now, let's go to another cameo involving Stan. Let's turn our attention to the first Thor movie in which Stan Lee had a cameo as one of the many onlookers of this mysterious hammer that somehow arrived on Earth. But what if he just decided to skip the truck entirely, walked up to the hammer, and actually found that he was worthy to wield Mjolnir? What if this sweet, old, lovable man were able to wield one of the most powerful weapons in the MCU? Would he feel the need to go around the universe as a hero, or would he use it in a more creative way? And if you're looking for the comedic potential in this scene, just imagine the blow to Thor's ego if this was the case. At least Captain America was a super soldier with a pure heart of gold. But the thought of Stan Lee of all people being able to lift the hammer? Well, that would be completely world-shattering to Thor. And hey, there are still plenty of MCU cameos that you could eventually play with involving Stan Lee. You could have him play an insane inmate like in The Dark World, an intergalactic ladies man like in Guardians of the Galaxy, a barber from the cosmos like in Thor Ragnarok, or even, and bear with me because this is perhaps the most ludicrous role of them all, an old man living in New York City like in The Avengers. And hey, in a show where literally anything can happen, why not have an episode dedicated to Stan Lee as a way to honor his legacy? The MCU is expanding throughout the What If show, and having a canonical reason as to why Stan keeps popping up throughout the universe could be interesting. But if you believe that seems a bit, shall we say, disrespectful to the legacy of Stan Lee, well then by all means I totally understand that point. But even without Stan, there are still plenty of exciting stories to be told. Plenty of exciting scenarios and situations that could play out throughout the show. Even if none of these pitches get brought over to the series, there is still plenty of fun and exciting ideas that Marvel could play around with. All they have to do, of course, is ask the question, what if? Thank you all so much for watching this wishlist video for Marvel's What If. Let me know what you guys think of these ideas in the comments below. And I want to hear from you. What other interesting scenarios would you like to see play out through Marvel's What If? Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And until next time, have a good day. Bye-bye.